Greetings everyone, and welcome to the Realm. I am Naden, your guide, here to provide you today's lecture on the Gods of Motus. Today, I shall be informing you of one of the more dreaded deities, depending on your perspective. I speak of Sairaus.
What a fortuitous circumstance to have been bequeathed to me. Perfect specimens for my studies.
Sairaus is the Domisean deity of sickness and disease. He is the father of every known illness, pathogen, and virus. If there is any inclination of ill health, it began with Sairaus. He possesses the ability to conjure any form of illness, deciding on symptoms, those vulnerable, and what may be able to cure it. Oh, that last point was quite interesting, wasn't it? Why would Sairaus wish his own diseases to be cured? Well, his sole goal is to challenge the mortal races. Each of his illnesses, save for a select few, challenges either the vitality or the intelligence of the mortal races, or perhaps both. Either one shall overcome the illness through the natural immunization through the bodily process, or the infected shall use their intelligence to conjure a cure. His plane of Motus, named the Horrid Mist, is, as the name suggests, a plane of endless miasma with the presence of tall, black stone pillars, moist from the surrounding fog. It is here that Sairaus observes and creates his diseases. Sairaus employs a scientific mindset in his practices. As such, mortals are no more but a testing ground for his experiments, despite his end goal to improve the mortal races. For this reason, he may be perceived as cold, calculating, unbothered, and perhaps cruel. Faithful to his studies, much of his time is spent on his sickly alchemy, conjuring sicknesses to challenge his flock, compiling experiments to test his creations, and observing the results. Observing, surely, it is his favorite. Many would agree that he takes pleasure in witnessing the symptoms of his diseases. Some of his creations, like the common cold, are constantly employed to ensure that the mortal body remains fortified and on guard. At times, he may introduce entire plagues if he perceives that mortals have lapses in their intellectual and medical prowess. On even rarer occasions, he has manufactured ailments that cause the body to evolve rapidly during immunization, creating powerful beings. Such an ailment, if you could call it that, is usually saved for those who remain loyal to his studies. Oh yes, he has a following. Those who believe that sickness is a part of the natural process and would willingly infect themselves to help in the Great Alchemist's studies. However, even failure can be true in experimentation. Sairaus has been known to be the end of many lives, to which he marks off as failed experiments by reasons of poor testing subjects, too strong of a sickly mixture. The list goes on. But Sairaus, despite his widely feared and abhorred reputation, has indeed helped the mortal races. How is such a thing realistic, you may inquire? Well, that is a story indeed worth telling. Our story begins in the underwater city of Trelondor, the great emerald of the blue deeps, home to the proud merfolk of the ocean water. During the city's inception and construction, the Mer were incessantly hounded by their biological cousins, the Sirens. During this time, the relations between the two ocean folk were tumultuous at best. Therefore, they were engaged in a subtle war, which ended soon before Trelondor finished its construction. What was born of that wartime was the idea of seclusion for the safety of the mermaid people. No one comes in and no one goes out. To everyone on the surface world, Trelondor remained nothing but a far-off myth. Despite their closed-off mentality from the rest of Evenel, the people of Trelondor flourished. However, Sairaus found Trelondor as a perfect opportunity for his experiments, a closed-off nation practically quarantined from the outside. He was curious as to what would become of the city should their quarantines be circumvented. If an illness came from the inside, what would the people do? With his theories and expectations documented, he began his experiment. He introduced a unique pathogen to the Trelondor community by infesting a single barrel of food stock. Those who consumed the tainted food displayed symptoms of fever, nausea, lethargy, and, if not tended to properly, death by mermatic pneumonia, to where the siphoning of oxygen from the water around them would be hindered. The contagion? Well, normally such a disease would cause the infected to sweat, to which the droplets could transmit the disease further. However, this was in an underwater city. The sweat droplets mixed with the surrounding water, acting as the contagion by proximity. And so, the disease, named the Fever-Tide Plague, took hold of the city of Trelondor, beginning with the middle-class district. Quarantines surely followed, but due to the rampant contagion, it proved to be a very poor way to contain the disease. And despite the best efforts of the mages and alchemists, no cure could be found. It would seem that Sairaus set the sickly city of Trelondor on a course to death, as many of the city's population was already dwindling. But he only silently observed, as the experiment had not concluded. A month had passed since patient zero, and the death toll had already reached approximately a fifth of the city's population. Only a dozen remained free of the disease, quarantined in one of the towers of the Emerald Palace. One such survivor was an explorer of the deep ocean caves, the other an aspiring alchemist. Both were avid explorers of their own departments of the unknown, and they could only look down in sadness at the city that they called their home, writhing in terrible disease. The alchemist had proposed an idea. Perhaps the reason as to why no cure has been found is due to the lack of proper ingredients. The explorer responded, but where could such ingredients be, if all we have here are plants of the deep? The explorer and alchemist pondered together and came to the conclusion of a ludicrous idea. Perhaps such ingredients were present on the surface. The idea of merfolk breaking the surface of the ocean was mad. Sure, they could certainly survive on the surface, but who could they trust? Their only interaction with outside communities was with the sirens, and we all know how that ended up. And what is there to trust the surface world? Perhaps they could be even worse. The royalty of Trelondor was quick to shoot down their expedition, claiming it to be too risky and too foolish. But another month passed with no progress to the cure. Just short of half of the population was now deceased. The explorer and the alchemist could not bear to sit idly by and watch the disease take the rest of their people. And so, against the royalty's wishes, they snuck out of Trelondor and made their way towards the surface. At the time, no established towns had been made in the western county near the ocean. For the two merfolk, the journey would be long as they made their way east. But for the tempered eyes of the explorer, the journey was met with the discovery. They came to a small town bordering a great forest. The town only held a dozen or so residents, some lumberjacks, some herbalists, all human. The sight of merfolk in this town was certainly startling to the residents. However, the kind words of the explorer and the alchemist allowed their plea for help to be heard. And, to the surprise of the two merfolk, the humans happily agreed to help. The alchemist was introduced to a new plethora of herbs and ingredients, as well as their properties. Soon the alchemist, with the help of the tutoring herbalists, devised a potential cure for the fever-tide plague. The use of surface soil-borne herbs was perhaps what the cure needed. The two merfolk rushed back to their home with, admittedly, fleeting confidence. When they had returned, they had discovered that the plague had infected the last few healthy remaining. Therefore, the cure that they had to work, otherwise Trulandur would fall. Miraculously, the cure succeeded. A day after treatment, all symptoms would be quelled and all signs of the plague would be wiped. Despite the royalty's rage against the alchemist and explorer for breaching the borders of Trulandur, they allowed a pardon in thanks for the cure. When the explorer and alchemist were inquired as to where they found the necessary ingredients, the two spoke of the humble and quiet human town on the surface. After the initial success, a trades deal was struck between Trulandur and the quiet town. Money would be provided to the town to aid in the cultivation and the ingredients required, plus some extra to further develop the town, in thanks for assistance in aiding their ailing city. Soon the cure was mass-produced and distributed to the populace, forcing away the fever-tide plague from the city for good. And at that moment, the royalty learned a valuable lesson. Perhaps remaining quarantined inside the walls within Trulandur was not the best cultural practice. Perhaps expansion would be safer, at least for now. What soon followed, beyond the trade relationship of the quiet town, was the opening of Trulandur's borders, allowing the influence of the outside world in, as well as letting their own culture color the surface world. And, as thanks for the quiet town's integral role in ending the plague, the town was henceforth named Hammon, the Mermatic word for healing. Hammon today continues its profoundly successful forestry and herb trade, helped along by the Ocean City. Observing from above was the Great Alchemist, Sairaus, who applauded the Mermatic people for their willingness to adapt to their dire situation. His experiment proved successful. As cold as the deity of disease is, brushing off the deaths that resulted from the plague, the argument towards his desire to improve the mortal kind is displayed in this tale. An obstacle meant to be overcome through means of adaptation and exploration. To him, that's all it is. If not for his intervention, Trulandur would still remain a myth. However, many mortals would still prefer to remain out of the grasp of the god of illness, still perceiving him as a devilish threat. And that concludes today's lecture. Take from it what you will. Until next time, farewell.